Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to Cochrane Canada Live. That is the research webinar series brought to you by the Canadian Cochrane Centre. My name is Adrienne Stevens. I hope you're having a great day, and I welcome all of you. We have folks joining from across Canada, coast to coast. We have folks patched in from Costa Rica, China, India, the U.S., Bahrain, UK, and Oslo. So welcome to all of you. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the funding agencies of Cochrane Canada, those being the CIHR Knowledge Synthesis and Exchange Branch, as well as 7 CIHR Institutes. Thank you to all of you for your support. And I extend a special thank you to the Research Promotion and Development Division of PAHO for providing Illuminate Live that makes this series possible. PAHO is the regional office of the WHO for the Americas and a valued partner organization of the Canadian Cochrane Centre. Select recordings are also hosted on the PAHO Research Promotion YouTube channel, so check us out there or through our webinar archive at cc.cochrane.org. And I just also want to take a moment just to orient you a little bit to the interface, in particular the participants window. And so today, if you have a question for today's speaker, you can just simply click here on the raised hand. A queue will form here in the participant window, and then she will instruct you when she's ready to take your questions. If you wish to send an emoticon to the speaker as she's giving her presentation or to me today, I welcome you to do so. There are emoticons as you see here under the participant board, and even right now if you wish you can send me a happy face if you're having a great day. And as well today we are going to have a polling feature. Oh, well, thank you very much. And we have a polling feature for today, and so I just wanted to give you a chance to try that out right now. And so under your participant window, if you just want to select a check or an X, you can do so. And what will happen is that your answer will remain depressed under the participant window. It won't be shown in the participant window because we are keeping your responses anonymous. And so great, I see your answers, and what I'll quickly do is I'll just publish the aggregate results to the board, and then you see that here. And this is what will happen during today's session, so that's great. So you know how that works. As well, I just want to remind you of the format of today's webinar. And so just as I've done, I've activated my audio, which you can see on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. So all you simply do is click on this button when you're ready to ask your question. And our speaker has indicated that it's your turn to ask a question. And so then ask your question. Make sure you press this again, though, when you're finished your question, and then that allows her the opportunity to return and answer it for you. And so next month, join us for the first joint Cochrane and Campbell Colloquium held in Keystone, Colorado, very nicely nestled in the Rocky Mountains. And so I look forward to seeing you there if you're able to go. And for those of you who aren't, please check out Cochrane.org. Under the multimedia portal, they will make select presentations available to you as a voiceover slidecast after the colloquium. And just to let you know, just to promo one of the methods groups as part of the Cochrane collaboration, and that is the Cochrane Adverse Effects Methods Group, for which our speaker joins us from today, and you can check them out at aemg.cochrane.org. And so I want to take this time to introduce our speaker, Sue Golder. Sue has a Master of Science in Information Management and joined the Center for Reviews and Dissemination in 1999 as an information officer. Her work has involved conducting literature searches for NICE reviews and CAG projects, and has done training in finding the evidence and supporting systematic reviews. She is a past recipient of a Winston Churchill Fellowship, which she used to conduct a study tour of Australia and New Zealand. Sue's research interests include retrieving data to populate parameters in decision analytic models and identifying information on adverse effects in systematic reviews. In 2007, Sue was awarded an MRC Fellowship in Health Services Research to evaluate and optimize the retrieval of research evidence for systematic reviews of adverse drug effects. She is currently undertaking her PhD and aims to complete this in 2012. Sue joins us today as co-convener of the Cochrane Adverse Effects Methods Group and is interested in hearing from anyone involved in studying the methodology of incorporating adverse effects in systematic reviews. And so, please join me in welcoming to the floor Sue Golder.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Can I have a smiley face? Oh, good. So, smashing. So, brilliant. So I'm going to be talking about finding adverse effects studies. An outline of the webinar for today. I'm going to start with a definition of adverse effects. Then talk about why adverse effects are so important, why we should include them in systematic reviews, and also why they are difficult to identify and how they differ from searching for effectiveness studies. I'll then go on to talk a little bit about the results of the first part of my PhD, in which I've looked at what authors of systematic reviews currently do to identify information on adverse effects, and also what the evidence suggests we should do. By all means, if you need clarity or have a question, please feel free to say. So a definition of adverse effects from the World Health Organization is that an adverse effect is a harmful or undesirable outcome that occurs during or after the use of a drug or intervention for which there is at least a reasonable possibility of a causal relation. And this differs from the term adverse event in that that's something that's bad that happens whilst you're using a drug or intervention, but it's not necessarily caused by or has a causal relationship with the drug or intervention. Other terminology that you'll hear is side effect, and that's often used for public patient information, but a side effect differs in that it can be positive or negative. Other terms you'll hear are adverse drug reaction, which is obviously for drugs, or adverse reaction. So why are adverse effects important? Well, first and foremost, they can be very serious, leading to hospitalization, long-term disability, and even death. A study in the USA suggested that adverse effects are actually the 4th to 6th leading cause of death in the USA. But it's not just those adverse effects that can be important. Adverse effects such as weight gain or acne, tiredness are also important. Because they affect quality of life and compliance with a treatment. And last but not least, adverse effects are important because of their cost implications. Estimates for costs in the NHS in the UK are of $2 billion per year. So why should we include harmful effects in systematic reviews? Well, considering only benefits will lead to bias. And decision makers who want to make an informed decision, be it patients, clinicians, or health policy makers, need to assess both the benefit and harm in order to obtain a benefit-harm balance. This is particularly so when there is a narrow margin between benefit and harm, when there are a number of equally effective treatments with different safety profiles, or when an adverse effect causes withdrawal from treatment. So I was just wondering if anybody would like to add any comments to the chat room as ideas on problems they have encountered or that they've heard other people encounter when searching for adverse effects. This could be within the search strategy, Did you have any difficulties there, and in particular what area, or has anybody had any difficulty accessing sources, or knowing which sources to search? Has anybody, or know of other people that have encountered problems that they'd like to share with us? So, well, I hope this isn't because you find it so easy. Well, it would be nice if it is, because I certainly find it very difficult to search for adverse effects, which is partly why I'm studying. Indexing inconsistencies, and the indexing can be quite poor. I think this is partly because adverse effects are a secondary or tertiary outcome, so they're often not the main focus of a paper. Lack of reporting. There's a lot of literature out there on the poor reporting of adverse effects by authors. Publication bias, that is an important consideration with adverse effects. So they may not be reported. People may, as I say, have as their main focus the effectiveness, and so may not report them at all. Or there may be publication bias in the fact that they think that adverse effect is interesting. So they're maybe more likely to publish something that's of what they consider more unusual, unexpected, or what they think authors may find. Hard to find a filter. Yes, it is very difficult to find a filter, unfortunately. You know, as we know, then there's lots of filters out there for RCTs and what have you. Yep. Lack of information available in published results. Yep. That's another good point. And again, I think that's because they're often a secondary or tertiary outcome. But also there's a very limited, often a very limited space devoted to adverse effects because of that. And so they might not give you enough information for you to incorporate the adverse effects into a meta-analysis. So. Was there any? Yep, need to search grey literature, such as conference proceedings, or to look in correspondence. Yes, it is important to go beyond the published, I feel, and quite often very difficult to find those grey literature sources. Was there anything else anybody wanted to add before I... sorry. You mentioned about balancing benefit and harm. How would you do that, considering that RCTs usually... it is very difficult to balance benefit and harm, because it's often the case, the RCTs... so you've got good quality data for short-term expected adverse effects that are common from the RCTs. So mix of evidence, yes. So that's again, we're searching for non-RCTs. Searching for non-RCTs is very difficult. There's been a lot of research into searching for RCTs, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, with the search filters. Difficulty searching FDA resources. I find the FDA site very difficult to search. I know there's a lot of databases out there that you can search for and pay, that actually make it a lot easier to search the FDA site, but that's not necessarily the best solution. And the very elderly are often not not studied. Yes, there's lots of patient groups that aren't, particularly in RCTs, that won't be included, that are more susceptible to having an adverse effect. Maybe pregnant women, children, elderly, people with comorbidities, and what have you. So if I just go through a list of problems that I've encountered, but I think you've actually listed more. So, but I'll just go through them just to check that we've covered them all. As stated, adverse effects are often a secondary or tertiary outcome. A study by Derry et al. Found in 2001 found that 23% of published trial reports that contained useful harmful effects data had no adverse effects text words in the title, the abstract, or the indexing. So how you find them is very difficult. Inconsistent terminology. I think this was one of the first things that somebody suggested. There is a lot of inconsistent terminology within adverse effects, not only in general terms, such as using generic terms such as side effect, adverse event, safety, risk, harm, which I mentioned earlier. Obviously some of these terms are very noisy. Safety will find you a lot of occupational safety. Risk will find you relative risk, risk ratios. Harm will find you self-harm. But also, even when you have a specific adverse effect, there can be a lot of inconsistent terminology and inconsistent indexing as a result. I've found that a lot of the papers that I retrieve are what I call red herrings, which have statements such as no significant safety problems were found. So yes, that's, obviously that's not giving you enough information for inclusion in a review. Sometimes there's two types of reviews really with adverse effects. The ones where we search for a named adverse effect, but there's also cases where we search for the safety profile. So we're looking for all adverse effects for a particular intervention. And obviously if we're doing that, then we may not know which adverse effects we're looking for, which makes it very difficult to predict or plan what we're doing. I think this was also suggested that it's very difficult to search for adverse effects because we're searching beyond RCTs. RCTs are often too short, not large enough, and don't include all patient groups to be able to find our adverse effects, especially rare long-term adverse effects. And there is a lack of search filters for observational studies, and also observational studies is more difficult to find because authors rarely state the study design, and when they do, it's not always the study design that you thought it was. So, for example, some studies that are called cohorts may actually be large case series. And also data sources. This was also mentioned that you need to contact industry and look for unpublished data. And if you're looking for case reports, you may want to go to places like the FDA or the UK equivalent, the Yellow Card system, and they are quite hard to search. So that was why I think that there's lots of difficulties in searching for adverse effects. So I think you've added quite a few there as well. So if I report on the work that I've been doing for my PhD, which is I'm only halfway through, I looked at how authors of systematic reviews currently identify information on adverse effects, and then what the evidence suggests they should do. This was carried out in the form of a survey of 442 systematic reviews published between 1994 and 2008 from the Cochrane database of systematic reviews and the database of abstracts of reviews of effects. And these were reviews in which the primary outcome was an adverse effect. So I had to limit it somehow, and that was the limit. So these 442 reviews, a lot of them did actually include non-RCTs. In fact, around 2/3 included non-RCTs. And these studies tended to be that they included were case cohort studies and case control studies. But as you can see from the figures here, there was a large number that also included RCTs. So the majority of the reviews actually looked for a pre-specified adverse effect. So say weight gain with oral contraceptives, or tiredness with beta blockers, for example. However, nearly a fifth did actually look for all adverse effects for a particular intervention. So did some sort of safety profile. The ones that looked at searching with adverse effect terms, 53% searched with a named adverse effect. So as you can see from the figures there, there was some that actually had a pre-specified adverse effect but didn't actually include the terms for it in their search strategy. And 17% searched with generic adverse effect terms such as side effect, adverse event, adverse effect, harm, risk, and what have you. There was a definite trend towards an increasing number of sources searched over time, which I think is what we'd expect, as well as a greater number of sources searched if there was an information professional involved. So the average number of, well, the median number of databases searched was 2. The range was 0, which I think was only one study, to 25. And the most popular sources were MEDLINE and reference checking, followed by Embase and contacting experts. Now the majority of these reviews were on a drug intervention, so that would be why Embase seems quite high maybe. Only 14% actually contacted industry, and not very many actually looked for unpublished data either. 13% looked at conference reports, 4% surveillance data, 4% the FDA website, and 3% looked at specific databases for unpublished data. So that's what people are doing at the moment. So is there any questions about that before I move on? Was there any surprises? So I also have looked at what the evidence suggests we should do. So firstly, where we should search. So should we be searching MEDLINE first? Is this the best source? Should we be searching for unpublished data? What difference does it make, including unpublished data? Should we be searching for the industry data? Again, what difference does it make? And lastly, which search strategies should we use? So looking at seeing if there was any filters out there, for example, on adverse effects, and combinations of terms that people had found useful. So if I go through these in turn, so firstly, where to search. I'd like to open this up to see if anybody's got any suggestions of where they think are good sources to search for systematic reviews of adverse effects. Micromedics, yes, that is a source that I've considered. We haven't searched it here at CRD because of the expense, but it's certainly a source that other people have searched. Are there any other suggestions where people might search? Would people search MEDLINE, Embase? Oh yes, Cyrus. Yep. Oh yeah, IPA. Yep. So sorry, International Pharmaceutical Abstracts. Health Canada, Mailer side effects. Yep. Addis reactions. So, any other ideas where you'd search? Where is mailers side effects? Mailers tends to be in a book format, although it may be available as well on the net. Would anybody else know that? But I know we have a book version here. Sinal, yep. So it's a good suggestion. Any other suggestions? Clinicaltrials.gov, yep, that's a good source. So obviously you'll come up with a lot of ongoing studies as well as patient blogs. Yes, I think that's one that's not been used very often, but yes, certainly a source. Any other suggestions? You shouldn't be searching for adverse effects, but studies. Are these less known databases archive full study reports? Sorry. Individual country clinical registries, yep. Contact the author of study. WHO clinical trials register. Gosh, yep. There's lots of different studies there. Oh, technology assessment sites, yes. Yes, very good. Yep. Is there any more? Oh, patients. Yes, an underused resource, but I think it's one that's going to be more. And I know in the UK there's a much more emphasis on patients in systematic reviews now. So, oh, figure-based, yep, by WHO, yep, it's a good source. Unfortunately, it can be quite expensive. But so can a lot of the drug databases. Disease societies, yep, yep. Gosh, I think you should all be doing this course, not me. Right, okay. Sorry, there's a question. Is our goal to identify any reports on any event with no verification or explanation of how the event was collected? There's a great deal of judgment that takes place to report one-off events in registry databases. I think, yes, we've got to take registry databases with a pinch of salt. You can't just... So... Sorry. And yes, there is a lot of judgment, but I think with systematic reviews we always have to be transparent about what we're doing, and yeah. So and so just be transparent about what you're doing and what you're finding. So if I could just move on then, I've listed a few database sources, not databases necessarily, here, but the list is enormous. I've got at the end some guidance from CRD and the Cochrane, and there's a lot longer list in there that'd be worth looking at. But here I've just come up with the list. If you're looking for spontaneous reports, there is the yellow card system in the UK, the FDA, obviously in America, summary databases and fact sheets and monographs. Somebody mentioned mailers, which is in this category. Bulletins, I think somebody also mentioned reactions, so that's a good source. And databases, there's a few here. Somebody's already mentioned IPA and DrugDex, I believe. There's a couple others there, IDIS, which has access to the full text. don't drug file and ToxLine. There is a lot more information for adverse drug effects. I am aware that the sources that I've listed are very biased towards drug adverse effects. Although I do realise that other interventions, it's very important to look for adverse effects too. It's just there aren't as many sources, data sources for them. So if I could just report on the work that I've done looking at where you should search. I did a systematic review to look for studies that compared sources of information on adverse effects to see what would come up. I found 19 studies, and these studies, most of them compared the number of relevant references. To say there was 16 relevant references from Embase and 12 relevant references from MEDLINE. There's some did a scoring system where they looked at the ability of a database to answer a specific question. So maybe it was on an A to E grade, where A was very good and E was very poor. So quite subjective. There was one, that looked at the number of case reports from different sources, and there was one study which looked at the unique relevant references. So I appreciate that none of these studies have actually looked at the impact on the results, which is the next stage. It's also quite hard to summarize, but I'm going to do my best. And just point out that the things that I found most interesting from these 19 studies. There was a lot of them did actually compare MEDLINE to other sources, but MEDLINE was only retrieved the highest number of relevant references in only 4 out of 13 cases. And in these 4 cases, in one case MEDLINE was compared with IPA, the International Pharmaceutical Abstracts. The other case, MEDLINE was compared with reference books, and the other 2 cases were the only time non-drug interventions were included. Most studies are on adverse effects are on adverse drug effects. So, although people are tending to search MEDLINE, 95% of systematic reviews of adverse effects search MEDLINE, and a lot of them only search MEDLINE. MEDLINE is obviously here not coming out as the place to yield the highest number of relevant references, particularly for drug interventions. Embase, in 8 out of 10 cases, searching Embase retrieved more relevant references than MEDLINE. In the 2 cases where it didn't, it was for non-drug interventions. So obviously that's suggesting that Embase is a better source for adverse drug reactions than MEDLINE. Derwent drug file came up quite well, which surprised me. It's not something I have to admit we search here at CRD. But in 4 out of 5 cases, searching Derwent drug file retrieved more relevant references than Embase or MEDLINE. So I certainly think that deserves some more investigation. Industry submissions did fare very well, and in 2 out of 4 cases retrieved the highest number of relevant records. And in many cases, there was a lot of unique records from the industry submissions. IPA didn't fare very well in terms of number of relevant records. That it was often the lowest or joint lowest. But as I said earlier, we need to look at more than just the number of relevant records. We need to look at unique records. Maybe it may be better for that. Or also looking at the impact on the results as well. There was lots of other sources searched, but most of these were only evaluated in one study, which is why I found it very difficult to summarize And some of these databases have also now folded. So there's lots of limitations here in that 12 of the 19 studies were published before 1999. As we all know, databases, a lot of them are folded, and there's lots of changes with time with databases. The number of relevant records that you retrieve will actually vary a lot depending on the search strategy you use. A lot of these studies didn't even report their search strategy, but if they did, they tended to be quite poor, and they tended not to take into consideration what studies they may have missed that were actually indexed on the database. So I think our take-home message is that Embase may be better for adverse drug effects over MEDLINE. We're not quite sure about non-drug interventions. As I say, there's only 2 studies which were of non-drug interventions, but MEDLINE did fare better with those. And I think it also indicates the potential value of Derwent drug file and industry. But unfortunately, I have to say more research is needed, which is the classic line, isn't it? But I think that, I'm afraid that's the case here, and in particularly for non-drug interventions, where we really don't know where to search. So is it all right to go on, I hope? Raise your hand if you've got any questions about that. Otherwise, I'll go on to unpublished data. Well, there has been quite a few studies there as well on unpublished data in adverse effects. So these are all studies with adverse effects. There's certainly a lot of research out there. In terms of case reports, there's actually been suggested that there's more unpublished data than published case reports of adverse effects. And in the case of trials, again, there's been found to be a higher percentage of unpublished trials that report adverse effects than published trials. So the data is out there. Does the data differ, though, in any way if it's published to unpublished? Well, a study by Yun Lok on case reports suggested that it did, in that the most frequent adverse effects in published cases tended to be respiratory and nervous system, and in unpublished cases tended to be thyroid and skin disorders. There have been 5 studies that compared the risk ratio from published studies to the risk ratio from unpublished studies. Now, this was for the same intervention and the same adverse effect. So, and I'll just summarize these 5 studies in this meta-analysis. As you can see, I've done calculated the risk ratio of risk ratios of 0.95, and as you can see, that the diamond crosses the line of no effect. In fact, it's very close to 1, suggesting that the risk ratios in unpublished studies does not differ from published studies. So the evidence out there suggests that unpublished case reports will generate a different picture to published case reports. And this might be, as I said earlier, that a more interesting case report or more unexpected case report might be more likely to be published. In the case of trials, there was no evidence from the studies here that data on adverse effects differs in published or unpublished trials. However, the inclusion of unpublished data, by suggestion of the availability, there seems to be quite a lot of unpublished data for adverse effects, and in some cases more than published. So the inclusion of unpublished data could provide more precise estimates of adverse effects, and this may be particularly important with adverse effects where they can be rare and difficult to find information on. So I've just listed some sources of unpublished data. It's not exhaustive. It's just a few that I can suggest. That's all. So before I go on to industry data, there's a question: what is my experience on implants? I'm afraid very limited would have to be my honest answer. Most of my studies that I have done on adverse effects have been on epilepsy drugs or ADHD drugs. What else have I done? Rosiglitazone. So very sort of traditional drugs. But if anybody else has got any experience with implants, maybe they could share them with us at the end. It'd be really good, because I'd like to hear. So, my next, thank you. Next section is on industry data and searching for industry data. Again, there's been a few studies out there looking at industry data and comparing the adverse effects data from industry data and non-industry data. One study has found that trials funded by for-profit organisations have actually tended to report more adverse effects than non-profit organisations. This might be because of regulation and law. We're not quite sure. Magnitude of risk of harm. 3 out of 4 studies which have looked at this found that industry data reported less risk of harm, so they downplayed it somewhat. There's been a study that looked at the tone of industry-funded studies, and so it looked at, it categorized articles as supportive or not, and looked whether if the articles were supportive, whether they had a financial tie with any manufacturer. And they found that authors of supportive articles are more likely to have a financial tie with not just necessarily the manufacturer of the intervention in the article, but with any manufacturer. So, and interestingly, the conclusions of studies funded by industry are more likely to be favourable, irrespective of the magnitude of the risk of harm, and this was found in 4 studies. So, in conclusion, there's no evidence that the number of adverse effects reported from industry and non-industry funded studies differed, but there is evidence that there may be bias in the interpretation and conclusions of industry funded studies. So we need to be careful there. So, so this indicates obviously that we should be searching. To me, it indicates that we should be searching for industry studies, but just be careful of looking at the conclusions. But we always look at the raw data, I think, anyway. So here's just some suggestions of sources of industry data. Again, it's not exhaustive, and I would suggest looking at guidance produced by CRD and the Cochrane Handbook for more suggestions. My last section of what I was going to talk about is search strategies. I think I've left the best bit till last. So I'm afraid I'm not going to come up with any answers, but it's more sort of guidance and suggestions. So first of all, subheadings. When I'm searching for clinical effectiveness, I rarely use subheadings. However, with adverse effects, subheadings are really good, and I'd really recommend trying to use them in your search strategy. In MEDLINE, there's adverse effect, contraindications, poisoning and toxicity, which you might like to consider. And these are subheadings which tend to be attached to the intervention. So I've got an example there of aspirin with those 4 subheadings attached. There are also subheadings which can be attached to the adverse effect, namely chemically induced and complications. So here we have the example of headache, chemically induced complication, subheadings. Embase has a very similar system to MEDLINE with its subheadings. It just has less subheadings that are useful for adverse effects. So we have adverse drug reaction and drug toxicity, which can again be attached to the intervention, and complication or side effects, which are attached to the adverse effect. And it's worth playing around with these subheadings when you're constructing a search strategy. Indexing terms, I've just listed some here. Again, a very strong bias towards adverse drug reactions, although you can see that some of these indexing terms are for surgery. So post-operative complications, for example. Again, they're just suggestions that you might like to play with when you're constructing a search strategy. There has been attempts to evaluate search strategies for adverse effects, and even to create search filters or evaluated search strategies. Badgett in 1999 came up with the most sensitive search strategy, which he did a test on another set of records, so it has been validated, of using floating subheadings of adverse effects, complications, poisoning and drug effects. Floating subheadings is where that subheading can be attached to any indexing term. It's very useful if there isn't an indexing term for whatever you're searching for, but it's also a more comprehensive or sensitive way of using the subheadings. And another study also found that floating subheadings to be useful, but suggested for high sensitivity that these should be ORed with terms such as adverse effect, adverse reaction, safe, safety, side effect, etc. So there has been just the one study that I know of that has actually looked at evaluating the search filter for a named adverse effect. And they looked at breast cancer and oral contraceptives. And the most sensitive search strategy that they came up with is this one here, which actually you can see has breast neoplasms in and some risk and risk factor type terms. But interestingly, it doesn't have the intervention term, which is oral contraceptives. So it's actually worth looking at the original paper, as they do suggest some other search strategies which aren't quite as sensitive, but do include the intervention terms. So using search strategies, we can see that there has been studies that suggest that you can achieve high sensitivity, but this is with low precision. As you saw, the study with the named adverse effect didn't include intervention terms, so it will by nature have low precision but high sensitivity. So precision in these studies ranged from 0.9 to 2.8%. And I'd like to also reiterate that that study by Derry et al. Suggested that using adverse effects terms, you may miss relevant articles, as they found 23% of articles didn't have adverse effects terms in the title, abstract or indexing. So to me, this indicates that we just can't rely on our electronic searches. But we very rarely do for clinical effectiveness, but maybe more so with adverse effects because they're the secondary or tertiary outcome. I just wanted to run through an example search strategy with you. I thought we could work through this together. This is a systematic review that Unlock has done. It's a systematic review of long-term use of glitazones and fractures in type 2 diabetes. So I want you to think about your PICO here. So because you can use PICO in most situations with adverse effects. So here we have a patient group, intervention, comparison, and outcome. So if everybody wants to think about what they would put in those categories, and I'll hope you've all thought about that. So what I would put in is, for patient group, is people with type 2 diabetes. Yes, it was, sorry, there's a question, any type 2 diabetes patients? In this case, it was any type 2 diabetes patients was the inclusion criteria. The intervention is glitazones. The comparison is any comparison. And the outcome is fractures. So if we look at each of these facets, these PICO facets in turn, and have a think about whether we would include them in a search strategy. So if we look first at the patient group, there is some debate about whether we should limit to type 2 diabetes, whether we should limit to this patient group when doing the searches. Some people may argue that, or we might be interested in fractures with glitazones in other population groups, maybe, maybe not. Or we might think that some papers don't actually mention the patient group in the title or abstract. So they might say something like rosiglitazones and fractures, or the adverse effects of rosiglitazones, or what have you. I'd just like, I'd be very interested to see the results here of whether you think we should limit to type 2 diabetes. Whether we could have some votes. Yep. So yep, there's quite a few votes coming in. So I suppose we should have another category saying unsure, because so is there any more votes? Yep. Is there any more? Yep. So if we want to summarise them, so as we can see, quite a few people saying no, we shouldn't limit, although 11% of us say we should. I say that there's a lot of debate around this, and it might just depend on what you're looking at, on whether you think. The thing that worries me is that fractures could be limited, could be associated with diabetes. But also what worries me is that if you put diabetes in, it might not be in the title and abstract as when you're trying to be ever so sensitive as you are with systematic reviews. This is just an example of a diabetes search strategy. Just the same as with clinical effectiveness, your text words and your indexing terms. So the intervention, as I said, the most sensitive search strategy in Will and et al. Did actually not include intervention terms. In this example, this probably wouldn't work because you would be limiting then by fractures and diabetes, if you included diabetes, or fractures and risk, maybe, which obviously fractures is a very common condition, so it would generate tens of thousands of records. But it is worth bearing that in the back of your mind, just in case for your topic it is relevant. And again, this is just an example search strategy. So the comparator, here we have any comparator, but obviously if we're including all study designs, which this review did, there may actually be no comparator because there'd be no control group. So in this instance, I think it would be appropriate not to include comparator terms, particularly as we don't have any. So, lastly, outcome. I think this is the most interesting thing with adverse effects, is you rarely search for the outcome when you're looking for clinical effectiveness studies. But with adverse effects, you often do. And there's two ways of searching for the outcome. You can search for specific adverse effects terms. So in this case, it's fractures, so you could search for your fracture terms. If you are doing a sweep of all adverse effects, you might want to look at some drug monographs first, and BNF, or whatever the equivalent, the British National Formulary, sorry, or whatever the equivalent is for your country, and include those terms. Although obviously you'll only be including terms for adverse effects that are already known or suspected. The other way to search for adverse effects is with the generic terms that I mentioned previously, such as the subheadings and terms such as safe or safety. In this example, searching for all the synonyms and indexing and what have you for glitazones and fractures in MEDLINE alone retrieved 251 records. We decided not to add it to diabetes, but in about 95% of cases they are in diabetes patients. But we didn't actually limit our inclusion criteria to diabetes either. In this case, there'd obviously be no need to AND with the generic adverse effects terms to make sure that the fractures were an adverse effect, because with such a small number of studies as 251 in MEDLINE, I know once you've searched all the other databases, you're probably looking at 1,000, maybe a little bit more. But there's still, I see, for a systematic review, no need to AND. You could OR with the adverse effects terms if you're worried that there's a paper that's about adverse effects of glitazones but doesn't actually contain fractures in the indexing or abstract, which is perfectly feasible. In this instance, it would actually increase the number to thousands and thousands, because glitazones are associated, if anybody in the UK maybe watched the telly on Monday, they would have seen Panorama was about the adverse effects of glitazones, and I'm sure there's been a lot of publicity in America. They are associated with heart failure and cardiac problems, and there's a lot of papers out there on that. So you might create a lot of noise in this instance with ORing with adverse effects terms. And as I said before, if you use the Wayland approach, you would generate tens of thousands. I think it's 35,000 in MEDLINE alone. So obviously you need to be pragmatic and when searching for adverse effects. So just an add-on really, I just wanted to mention citation searches before I forget. There has been a study that has indicated that researchers are unlikely to design a safety study without a signal. So it can be quite useful to use case reports or case series of suspected new adverse effect and look to see what's been published that subsequently that has cited that case report or case series. And that has been, as I say, this study suggested that that was a reasonable approach, and it did work. So I'm just coming to an end now, and I just wanted to talk about the future for adverse effects. There's certainly a I work for CRD, I'm also involved in the database of abstracts of reviews of effects, and we can certainly see an increasing number of reviews, including adverse effects, either as a secondary outcome, in addition to the clinical effectiveness, or as a primary outcome. That both types of reviews are increasing. We're also seeing better reporting. And I'd like to also just indicate that there is help and support available to you if you undertake a review or want any help and advice. The Cochrane Adverse Effects Methods Group, the website's already been flagged up, but I'd like to flag it up again. Please join our group, and we also have a discussion list where you can post problems, and we have a specialist advisory panel where you can email individuals who have an expertise in certain areas. For example, we've got somebody that's very good at Bayesian statistics, and she will help you in that area. Somebody else who's very au fait with patient representation, and others that are for study designs. But by all means, please join us, and please offer your expertise if you have one. A question, sorry, just there. Are you aware of any studies which have looked at the efficacy of the revised consort statement in improving ADR reporting? I know that there's some studies ongoing looking at the consort statement. I'm afraid I don't know of any that are published. And this presentation I'm going to make available as well. I'm happy for you to all steal it and change it however you see fit. Sorry, there's another question. What do I not understand is that effectiveness, we don't usually restrict searches by outcome, but rather limit to patient and intervention and comparators. Why then should one consider outcomes in searching for harms? Will it not increase the likelihood of retrieval of studies affected by a lot of publication bias? I would certainly consider outcomes when searching for adverse effects, but I'm not necessarily saying that you have to search for outcomes. I have to search for the adverse effects. You may be, but it may be that you need to be pragmatic and add that facet to your search strategy in order not to find lots and lots of records. Obviously, that you could be talking about tens of thousands, so it's worth playing around with the outcome. I'll just quickly let you know about the guidance out there, which I have mentioned already. The CRD guidance and the Cochrane handbook have sections on adverse effects, which I really would recommend looking at. I've just listed my references here in case you wanted to look at more detail about the studies that I've mentioned. Sorry, there's another question. How do you risk assess without denominator data? With difficulty, you obviously you can do a lot more with data where there's a control group and you know the nominator and the denominator, because often you don't know the nominator as well. But I think you'd have to just do a narrative synthesis in this case. Another question is, do you find heterogeneity in the definition of the same events? So, yes, is the answer. Yes, the definition of the event is quite interesting. Sometimes you find that people break them down a lot further to make it so that they're not statistically significant. I've seen this with industry studies where if you break, say, the adverse effect into lots of little categories, then you can make them all non-statistically significant. But yeah, it's often difficult to know whether it's the same adverse effect. The terminology is very inconsistent. So, is there anything else, or shall we wrap up? I'll hand over them. You can always email me if you've got any questions later on, and I am happy to help you with any search-related questions. As I say, we do have other experts in other areas of the systematic review process, so don't ask me about Bayesian statistics. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Sue, and yes, I applaud you along with the rest of them. Thank you for such a great and informative talk for today. It's certainly giving me a few things to think about and consider when I'm putting together searches for reviews. And thank you to all of you for your participation during the webinar, during the discussion, the voting, and for your questions. It's been a really great session. What I'm going to do at this time is I'm going to send through Sue's presentation as well as an evaluation form for you to fill out. We would very much like your feedback on this session, maybe ideas for other future topics that we can hold in our webinar series, and any other feedback you wish to provide. So thank you very much for your participation again, and have a wonderful day.